Response video to Nick on the subject of this will making stuff, goodwill making stuff. In his response to the first couple of parts I did, or at least the first parts in the first part. Okay, but anyway, yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, these videos aren't very popular, but they're probably the most important ones ever made in the history of videos. Anyway, I like the idea of whatever the Ding principles are, whatever thinking points, however we describe it. I guess I would say that the first one really should be the think thing. Whether that's because you're surprised by a thought that pops in your head or not. I guess any time you're contemplating or going to engage in any kind of significant behavior, thinking would be a good idea. If you have time to do it, that rule should be, then do it. Okay, if you can think about it before doing it, think about it. Yeah, if you don't have time, well, no point. Just do what you have to do. Let your whatever reflexes or intuition rule. But if you have the opportunity to think. That should be the first rule. That thinking is a good thing. Yeah, put that on the list. It's a good thing, thinking. Alright, so, whether we combine that with the woo thing or not is whatever, either way. But yeah, so let's call that number one. Alright, as for the asking yourself, is that logical, when these thoughts run through your head? I don't know, it gets a little complicated because obviously your desires are never going to be logical. It's the methods or the means or the activity, figuring out whether or not balancing the cost to the benefit. That's sort of the question, and those answers get complicated. So we're almost trying to describe how to arrive at those answers. I mean, the mythology or methodology that has to take place to understand whether it's a good idea. I mean, is it logical? Sort of depends on whether you're thinking in the context of, well, I'm only going to live till tomorrow, or if you're thinking in the context, I'm going to live for 80 years, or if you're thinking in the context of, yeah, and there's a future and outside world and all these other elements I'm interacting with. So you really have to have a context to ask the question, is that logical? Because without the context, the answer is going to be really different. Alright, you didn't like the closed system thing. I'm not a big fan of closed systems either, so I'm not glued to that. I guess all we're trying to say is that if there's whatever your brain's going to derive is going to be based on how much time you give it to create understanding. Okay, because you really have to put the time in to process the information, to create ideas and solid perceptions and principles, and the stuff you let come in, the books you read and the people you hear and the news you watch and the awareness you acquire. And that that's so that might be, I mean, it can't really be a thinking point to say you should have a competent brain before you make decisions. I mean, maybe it can be, but I mean, I don't know where we shove that one in as a premise. I mean, maybe before you should even start your brain up, before you should even start the engine of your life, you should realize that I should be competent before I should learn how to drive before I get into the car. I should have some sort of authority to have this power that's been disposed. I mean, I have this power to do shit. I can pick up a club and smash something. I have power. Do I have competence? Have I acquired the faculties to be able to control this power? And maybe that's got to be one of the first rules or thinking points, is assess your competency. I mean, have you reached a sufficient competency to exercise the power you're going to perhaps take authority over? So that sort of gets to be an interesting question. I really like the rules for different ages kind of thing, to try to establish, what you try to get into somebody's head at what period in their life, so they have, so they can really work with their own maturation, so that it's more than just coalescing something at some one point in your life, you're actually have some influence over your conditioning, because I guess the right thinking early enough can help you mitigate against the arbitrary conditioning that happens to us. You might be able to have a mental mechanism at the right age to be able to stave off the distortion and perversion of your sensibilities that might take place because some old haggy bitch that you had as a school teacher in the 4th grade that was wearing the yellow hat fucked you up forever or on the color yellow, because you didn't have enough perspective to know it's not the yellow hat's fault, that it happens to be on an asshole's head. But I just mean that, well, you get the idea. That we are conditioned in whatever number of these first dozen years of our lives, and it'd be really good to be able to have some control over that, some mental mechanism to protect against the perversions that take place. As to the I guess I don't know what number it was, but anyway, the point that our brains will eventually get this right, that if given enough time, civilization will grow a brain collectively. I think that's sort of inevitable, just because I think even though the wrong people are breeding, or this happens or that happens, and we've been suckers for a long time, the spiral, I think, is just unavoidably upward in terms of what gets filtered out, because I think the brain is innately built to be rational. And so as facts become more and more obvious, it becomes harder and harder for people, the phantasmagoricals, to contrive a piece of bullshit that they're going to be able to sustain through that spiral of logic and reasoning and scrutiny and filtering. And so I think bad ideas do fall eventually, and the good ideas do rise. And so if the human race could maintain its existence long enough in a state where it has time to think, I think it will think more elegantly.
On the subject of truth and childish honesty and parents, dishonesty, parental dishonesty, there really is a problem here, just because, people have kids for stupid reasons. And, should you tell your kid that your parents are fucktards? That gets kind of complicated. I would concede there's, a pragmatic equation where you just can't impose too much truth on a young mind, because you have to somehow create motivations for it to play the game. And if you make the game too ludicrous too early, they're not going to play it. And it's probably going to be hard. Their life is going to be more difficult than it needs to be. I mean, I guess obviously I think we're trying to make this goodwill thing, creating goodwill or character, as painless as possible. I mean, obviously there has to be some pain in it, I think, for somebody to really gain any real good out of life, or to gain any real character. You have to have some appreciation, so you're going to have to endure some pain. But I guess the whole idea is to mitigate against as much of that as possible. I mean, make as much of it conveyed through an understanding rather than conveyed through an experience. So to avoid having to have the car wreck to appreciate that wrecking cars sucks. But so and so kids, that's sort of a tough equation, is exactly how much can you dump how early. So that we'll definitely have to work through. Alright, so the other thing was the golden rule. You brought that up because that was one you didn't really get. And so I'll give a quick run through the idea. I think it's kind of obvious, but I'll try to do this right. I mean, if we were looking at two external peoples, Jim and Bob, and somebody had to, drive a wooden dowel through their head or something, and it had to be one of them, Jim or Bob. We obviously, there's no difference. It's a practical matter. We would just go like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, okay, let it happen to Joe, or Jim, or Bob. I shouldn't have added the Joe. But obviously, if we were going to have to experience it, it's, whoa, fuck, no, no, somehow it's them, make it happen to them, not me. And we know that's just, selfish bullshit. And so, the idea of our essential equality, like I said, we can see it when we look at other people. I mean, people, it's an old cliche, but, well, all black people look alike, all that kind of thing. I mean, we genericarize the rest of the living creatures around us pretty easily. We just say, dog and cat, and we just label them, and they're all the same thing, you know, and it doesn't matter much whether something happens to that one or that one. So, you know, and I would say the same thing extends into the future. So my argument basically is we, you know, it's pretty easy to see that it doesn't, to know logically that it doesn't matter whether you have a broken leg or I have a broken leg. The broken leg is going to suck, and it's not going to suck less because it's you, and from your perspective it shouldn't suck less because it's me, or something like that. And I would just argue that the future's the same thing. I mean, those people in the future are just us. They're just another variety of us. Okay, so they don't have the same name, and their face looks a little different, and there's a few different wackier ideas running through their head. So what? There's no substantial difference. So if, you know, if we're gonna rip their skin off and eat it today, you know, we have to realize that it's the same as ripping the guy next door's skin off and eating it. I mean, you know, I mean, I just don't see. It's not that complicated. I mean, maybe a 6-year-old can get it. Maybe it's just hard to get it into older brains. I don't know. But we can work on it some more if we need to.